Buonvenuti. Welcome back to Millennial Mental Health Channel. Dana and I have been watching a show where there's an Italian guy. It's called From Scratch, so I figured I'd try out my Italian, because I don't know if you know this, but I am technically a quarter Italian. So there's my diversity that I bring to this show. Eddie, how are you?
What is technically a quarter Italian? Like you just like... What does that mean?
Well, we thought I was a quarter Italian until my parents did the 23andMe and all the genetic stuff.
No.
And then, like, my dad thought, our last name's Romano, which literally means of Rome. But apparently we're more French-German than anything, hence the white. So, you know.
Okay, real quick. Same thing happened to Ryan. Ryan, our mutual friend, for those listening, Ryan, I'll spare you the story, but basically one day he told us he was Italian, and we were just like, since when? And then he did the 23andMe, or what? I think he did it. Basically, he's Polish. So same. He was wrong. He lied to us. But I think back to your other question, I think you asked how I'm doing. I am well. It's good to see you, my friend. I was just telling Justin before this, I just completed a 3-day youth mental health first aid training to be an instructor. So basically, if you look this up, there's this really great program called Youth Mental Health First Aid. There's an adult version. It basically teaches anybody who comes in contact with either adults or youths how to navigate conversations about mental health, how to connect them to proper resources, like a really good training. So I learned how to, I went through the training. I then completed the training on how to train the training, give the training. And I guess as of today, I'm a certified youth mental health first aid instructor. So I think part of the agreement is that the county that I live and work in paid for it, is gonna want us to kind of preach the word of youth mental health first aid. I'm excited about it. It was a really cool curriculum. It got me all kind of jazzed up, and I've been really fortunate. The last 2 big trainings I've had have really been helpful. Have really been something that I found like interesting and help and make me a better clinician. So yeah, that's been exciting. How are you?
Cool. I'm doing well. I've been practicing my TED Talk like crazy. If you're in the area, November 19th, Omaha, Creighton Heider Business Building. November 19th. I'm really excited for it. We just had our first ultrasound today. Or no, sorry, not our first one, but another ultrasound, the anatomy scan.
Yeah.
And I got to see my son's face. So that was pretty dang cool.
Do you look more like you or Dana?
He looks like a perfect mix of the two of us, based on nothing but sound waves. Well, today we are talking midterm elections, because yesterday was the day, November 8th, the midterm election day. So we wanted to do a whole episode on politicians throughout history, kind of the effects of politics and on mental health. We have a couple of shout-outs for today. We just finished... or partially finished a collaboration. That doesn't make any sense because we're not finished if it's partially finished. But we just did a collaboration with our friend Benoit on the Discover More podcast. So he's going to be releasing an episode. We'll probably be releasing that episode in a couple of weeks after he releases it too, in kind of a 2-part thing. If you didn't know as well, we are now on YouTube, so if you prefer a video, go check us out on YouTube. You can see Ed's beautiful face on YouTube, so I would highly recommend you go check it out.
I feel like it's so much pressure with YouTube because, like, I'm now thinking, like, way more about my face and, like, what I'm doing as we're recording. But, yeah, I mean, feel free to check it out. It's new for us. We're just getting started with it. But if you prefer just to listen to us over your car sound system or your headphones, whatever it is, we'll keep doing that, too. One shout out that I do want to give, I didn't put it in the show notes, is recently we found out that we are on Apple Podcasts featured again. If you go to the browse section and you scroll down a little ways away, but if you scroll down, there's a section called Therapy Starter Kit. And in it is, I think, eight shows, maybe 10 shows that Apple Podcasts has just decided are good therapy starter kit type podcasts, and we're in there with some really cool podcasts. I think Therapy for Black Girls is one that's really popular. Teenage Therapy is another one. Our friend from Latinx Therapy, her podcast is on there too. It's just really cool to be on there, and we wouldn't be there without you guys. So I guess the shout out is to share that with you, but the shout out is to the listeners. So thank you guys.
Woo! We do love our listeners. And I would say last shout out of the day is to allthat'sinteresting.com, where I got some of this information from today's episode on some of the politicians. So, as usual, we will start out with some story time on the topic of politics. So when I was working as an adult psychiatrist before I evolved into child psychiatry, I had a clinic at the VA. And it seems like with that population at the VA, I just had so many patients that would come in and just want to talk politics. And it was so emotional immediately. And it would just get more and more ramped up throughout our session, to the point where literally I had to tell people, like, we have to stop doing this. Like, we have to stop talking politics. We got to talk about your mental health. And we have to address this because it seems like politics are starting to wear on your mental health. So I saw personally, professionally, that politics were really starting to harm people's mental health. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this episode.
Yeah. Okay, just did an extra long pause because I forgot to check. How's my mic? Is that connected?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay.
And mine's good?
Yes. Okay.
Groovy.
Good. Didn't want to fuck it up.
Good call. I mean, thanks for pausing and checking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think on my end, on the youth side, my one story is just of a student, not really, he was a student, but I didn't work in a school at the time. My client, he had come to me. One of his main stressors was just relationships at school, peer relationships. And the issue was that he had differing politics from other people in his school, and he was really bothered by it and was really having a hard time processing that people were allowed to, not that they were allowed to have different beliefs, but that he didn't believe in their beliefs, so that he struggled with that. And he struggled with feeling like rules were unfair, like he wasn't allowed to wear or sport certain paraphernalia of his political beliefs, while other people were allowed to wear what they wanted regarding their, maybe not so much political beliefs, but their identity. He struggled with that, but it ended up being a really good client for me. It was something where I never once talked about my own thoughts, my beliefs, my politics. It was more of, how can I help you better manage these stressors and these emotions? And by the end of it, I think one of our last sessions, he's like, I think I've just come to the conclusion that people can just think whatever they want. And as long as they're not directly talking to me or saying anything to me or doing anything to me, I should just be okay with it. And it feels cheesy as fuck, but it really happened. And it was cool. It was something I'm like, hell yeah, you, I think, just became a little bit of a better person today. Not because of anything I did, but because of the work that you did.
Yeah. There's a really good 60 Minutes piece about polarization and how the words civil war are popping up more and more on social media, and people feel like this country is so divided. But really, if you look at it, we are not any more divided than we ever have been. It's mostly just social media telling us and changing our perception of what's going on. And if you actually sat down in a physical room with some people who don't agree with you, you would realize that you have some things in common and that there's perfectly good reasons why everyone believes what they believe. So I think one of the things that we like to emphasize on the show is that it does take both sides. It takes people with differing opinions, and we want to try and appeal to both sides, because the whole, we're just not going to listen to anything else the other side has to say, just doesn't really get you anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump into really the meat of today, we're obviously going to hit you with some stats and facts. This is from the Newport Institute. There will be a link in the description. Our first stat and fact is that 25% of people have felt depressed when their candidate did not win. I can speak anecdotally of one time in recent history where, I don't know if I'd say depressed, but I definitely felt down, and I definitely had a hard time after a certain election. Another stat and fact is that 1/5 of people lose sleep over politics. I guess another anecdote. Yesterday, Kevin and I were up a little later and a little stressed about how the governor election was going here in Oregon. I will gladly report that we did get some sleep, so that was good. We'll also hit you with 29% of people report losing their temper over politics. I feel like that is underreported. I feel like that number's got to be a lot higher than 29%. And I'll finish the last stat and fact because I want you to say the next thing that's coming up, Justin. More than 20% of people have politician disagreements or political disagreements that have damaged relationships with friends. I'm not surprised about that. And I think, especially you and I, Justin, not that we're disagreeing about stuff, but just in our age and where things have gone the last 8 years in our age group, things have changed a ton. We've had like those formidable years of like the after high school to college to where there's really a lot of like personality development, right? We talk about how when you're 25, that's about whatever your personality is at 25, you're pretty much that's a done deal. That's kind of going to be your personality for the rest of your life. Your frontal lobe is about fully developed. Your executive functioning. So really, those years of seeing like people's ideas and beliefs shift, and seeing how that people we're friends with or people that we thought we had a lot in common with before, seeing how that's like totally shifted and totally changed as we've gotten older.
Yeah. I actually saw a recent piece on NPR, or I should say heard a recent piece on NPR, how politics is like the new race in terms of things that divide people. And it used to be in America that people would say like, you can't date a Mexican, but now it's like, you can't date a Democrat. Like race is no longer the biggest issue, which in a way is a good thing. But in another way, it's a bad thing because now people are so polarized over politics that it literally changes who you can and cannot date. And the fact that there are specific dating sites specifically for Republicans for young people because on dating sites most people won't date them. If you're a Republican, it's probably very hard to go on Tinder and find someone who will see you and date you.
Need to stop laughing.
Yeah.
I saw like a TikTok recently. I can't even fully remember it, but like the creator made a profile on like the Republican only or whatever it was, like dating site, and it was basically all men, and they couldn't.
No.
It was just not a good experience. I want to like with what you're saying, Justin, of like. It is good that it's not so much about race, maybe when it comes, but like if it's not one thing, it's another thing, right? Like it's tough. And I also want to point out what you said earlier of like if you sit in a room with people and you don't know like their political beliefs, and you'll find that you have a lot more in common than you think you did. Like absolutely. I do also want to validate too the other end of it where it's like I think it's fair for people to have like non-negotiables when it comes to whether it's politics or maybe more what people believe are like human rights or constitutional rights. Like I think that's fair. I think it's fair for people to have non-negotiables. But anyway, we digress. It's not about what we think. It's not about what we believe. We're going to talk about how politics have really fucked up some politicians' lives and their own mental health.
Yes.
We do want to make another quick point, like as we kind of move forward with today's episode, is that news is becoming a lot more nationally based and less local. So what that kind of means, there's multiple articles that have come out that say that this is bad for local communities. There's going to be another link that Justin's going to add in the description of an article from Northwestern University. So
basically what we're trying to say is the more we focus on national news, the less we focus on local. And oftentimes local is actually what impacts us more. So if all we care about is national news, then we're not actually pumping any money into local news sources. So reporting goes down. And if no one's covering local politics or business, that leaves politicians and businesses to pretty much go unchecked. The media and reporting was pretty much how we kept tabs on people and made sure that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. So this is increasing corruption huge. Like, it's a big issue in America these days. So as much as you can, try and support your local reporters and their news agencies, because the health of your community really depends on it.
Yeah. I will say, I think one thing that over the last couple of years that I think myself and Kevin have gotten into is like listening to NPR is like more national, but I have like the OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting radio station saved on my car. We watch the news a decent amount, like the local news, really just to keep up to date with stuff going on. The other day when we were doing our mail-in ballots, thank you, Oregon, we were filling those out. We were just sitting there and trying to go through them and read through the measures together and think of like, okay, look at the things that are like impacting us and impacting like where we live. So absolutely, like you'll miss some stuff if you're not paying attention to the local things. Like there will be things that you have no idea that are happening. Like anyway, you don't need to hear about the measures we voted on, but it's absolutely, it's important to consider your local options for news. Moving forward and looking at the other stuff we have today, I mean, politicians can be under a ton of stress, and that's kind of the main idea of today's episode. For example, if you think back to January 6th, 2021, I think the attacks on the Capitol, people were genuinely scared for their lives, whether it was Nancy Pelosi, whether it was, what is it, Mike Pence, is that his first name? I haven't talked about that guy in a long time. I know he was scared. There was a ton of people who were actually scared for their lives. If you think back to the different episodes that we've made specifically on mental health disorders and diagnosable mental health disorders, trauma can be a piece of it, and not just trauma in the sense of like what we would consider, like what I personally think is trauma, but it's someone's perceived experience that can be traumatic for them. So for them, if they think they just experienced a great trauma, then that could be something that potentially leads to PTSD or other stressor related disorders.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then I know that Nancy Pelosi's husband just got attacked with a hammer, and man, so a lot of politicians are under some stress. They go through some hard things. As much as I say that I don't like politicians all the time, it's a tough job. They tend to have heavy workloads and have a lot of strict deadlines, which adds to their stress. We read an article from the Washington Post that actually said that politicians have about the same rate of mental health disorders as the general population, so about 1 in 5. So it's not actually higher. I think in our athletes episode it was higher. And so every once in a while a profession does have a very high rate, but it doesn't seem that politicians have a high rate. But job security is also very insecure for politicians. I couldn't imagine having to run a campaign every 4 years against another psychiatrist to keep my job as a doctor. So that's crazy. It's a crazy system that we have. And last point here is that female politicians tend to receive more death threats and social media harassment than their male counterparts, which is kind of sad.
Yeah. I mean, if you want an example that's extremely sad and difficult to see a lot of the time, if you just look at AOC's Twitter and see how many stupid-ass people say things about her, say things to her, and she just has to brush it off, because if she didn't, she would be spending all her waking hours dealing with or responding to these comments. So it's tough. But anyway, I feel like I keep getting us to digress. We're going to jump into the famous politicians. Justin, take it away, because I'm looking at the first name and I have no idea how to pronounce that.
I figured this one would have to be me. You've probably never heard about Kjell Magne Bondevik, who was a Norwegian prime minister in 1998, who stepped down for a month from his position to address a depressive episode that he was going through. He was really open about it, and even tried to use his platform as the PM to address the stigma around mental health and getting help for mental health. Despite him having mental health problems, the people of Norway re-elected him. And I think that's so cool. And this is such a good example to demonstrate that depression can be transient. It can, with the right treatment, and it can go away, and you can go back to your normal self. And he was able to use that difficult time in his life to help people and change the perception of mental health in Norway.
Wow, that is really cool. Those Norwegians, man, I feel like they do. I feel like there's a lot of European stuff that's just way better than us.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Next up, we have good old Abe Lincoln. If you have if you have a penny or a $5 bill, you can see his face. The penny's not so clear to see his face, but the $5 bill for sure. We're pretty sure everybody, we shouldn't say everybody, we do have listeners from other countries. We've actually been in the charts in other countries. But for those of you who don't know, Abraham Lincoln is definitely idolized in history classrooms across the United States. But if you're unsure who he was a U.S. president from 1861 to 1865. He was documented to have had multiple episodes of depression throughout his life. Back then, they called it severe melancholy. So definitely see how much our terms and our words have shifted since then. I think if we told teens or told people they had severe melancholy, that would suck. I mean, that would be so invalidating. That would be so shitty to have to deal with. Like, yeah. Anyway, some historians have said that Lincoln's depression helped him become introspective and examine what is truly right and just in this world. His depression also taught him what it was like to suffer, and some people believe that this helped him have empathy for slaves. If you're not familiar, if you are familiar and you don't remember, he's a great example of how mental health does not hold us back, because for him, he is most famously remembered for one of the greatest acts in history, which was freeing the slaves. He's also remembered for being assassinated at the theater, but we can get to that later. Abraham Lincoln was able to get through a lot of his severe melancholy or depression to be one of those presidents that's still highly regarded to this day.
And we should probably do a whole episode on John Wilkes Booth, to be quite honest, because he sounds like. I feel
like I went on the. Oh, God, I was gonna say I think I went on the. Not I think I know I went on the 8th grade East Coast trip, and I think we went to the theater that he got shot at. So, yeah,
Ford
that'd
Theater?
really make. Yeah, I was gonna say that, but I was like, damn, I don't want to sound stupid. We should. That would be like a full circle moment for me.
That'd be kind of cool. Yeah, and sorry, I'm a trivia nerd, so I was like, the Ford Theater? What is the Ford Theater, Alex? Thank you.
R.I.P. Alex.
R.I.P. Man, pancreatic cancer, not a way to go. Either way, up next we have Mr. Martin Luther King Jr., MLK Jr., who is the civil rights leader who lived from 1929 to 1968. He was known for his focus on nonviolent means to gain equality and equity for black people in America. MLK had significant depression episodes, which actually started in his childhood. In our research on him, it turns out that he had 2 suicide attempts in his adolescence. So he had some pretty significant mental health issues. Apparently, his staff had urged him on multiple occasions to seek care for his mental health, but he had refused. And some say he was afraid that his opponents politically would try and use his mental health problems as a way to show that he was weak. One quote that I really liked that I found from him is, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." And I find this is such an ironic quote because he seemed to be silent about his own mental health. He was suffering in silence because he was afraid of the stigma. And that's why we're trying to do this whole show, is to just help people understand that you can talk about this. We're trying to get rid of the stigma so people feel safe and comfortable and say, hey, if Eddie can do it, I can do it.
Yeah. And next up, and I feel like it's been a tough time for England. They lost their king and their queen in the span of however many months, but we are going to talk about Princess Diana. We like talking about her a lot on the show. She was an icon. She was someone who was very well liked, very well regarded. I don't know a whole lot about Princess Diana, just out of my own, like what I've learned in my lifetime, but I do know that a lot of people loved her, and again, she was an icon. So a little bit more about her. She lived from 1961 to 1997 when she died in a car accident, likely caused by the paparazzi. I've heard a lot of people say that the Queen might have set her up, or other people might have set her up, but that is neither here nor there. She was the wife of now King Charles. She was said to have depression, bulimia, and possibly borderline personality disorder, which I think we've talked about every single one of those disorders. So if you want to learn more about them, we have an episode on it. We love using her as an example of how people with BPD are misunderstood and how they are capable of having great compassion and empathy. During her time, she was a huge advocate for the underserved communities, like people who struggle with home stability and the victims of HIV and AIDS. And one of the most famous things that she did was she went into a hospital to hug people with AIDS during a time where there was a whole lot of stigma around people who had AIDS and misinformation about the transmission of the virus.
I love how you threw in home instability instead of homeless, because I had actually written homeless in our little script that we follow, but that's such a better term. Like it just is a less judgy term.
I'm going to be completely honest. It's because of the training I just did. We talked a lot about like people first language. And actually I was telling Justin, like part of my certification process was I had to teach back a section of the training that I'm going to be instructing. And I had to do like a 15-minute presentation. And my presentation was about part of it had to do with person first language. So I've already the training was worth it. I learned something that I'm using right away in my daily life. So yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We try to be as informed as possible on correct terminology. And man, I was actually working with some people the other day who were talking about kids, and they were like, "Oh, she's a cutter. She's a runner." And I really, man, it's hard for me not to say, like, don't do that. Like, she's a person who has cut. Don't call her and identify her by the things that this person has done. It's just so judgy. And it just, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm overly sensitive, but that's just me.
No. No, I'm right there with you.
Up next, we have Nero, who is the leader of Rome. We're going way back here to 54 AD. And that stands for after diet. I'm just joking. After death. Man, I'm cheesy today. He was he was a pretty horrible man, and he burned a lot of Christians in his time. Obviously, we don't have like our current. We didn't have our current mental health knowledge and definitions back then, but a lot of scholars have looked at it and think that he probably had narcissistic personality disorder, possibly even histrionic personality disorder. And this is just a reminder to check out our episodes on narcissistic personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder in case you're interested. And one of the main points that we want to make is that people with cluster B personality disorders are often villainized. So cluster B is narcissism, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder. But oftentimes people have those personality disorders as a result of significant trauma and their upbringing. And having those personality disorders makes it really hard to have healthy relationships in their lives and come up with a sense, and a lot of them have a very profound sense of loneliness. So we try and hold our judgment from people with those types of personality disorders because they need help. They don't always deserve such harsh judgment that the world often gives them.
Yeah. I think it's important for, newer clinicians, more seasoned clinicians, just to remember, like, yes, while there is some difficulties that come with working with people who have, the cluster B personality disorders, just imagine how tough it is for them to live their daily life. Like, their struggles are 10 times worse than our maybe insecurities as a clinician if we're having a hard time working with them. So we got to be mindful of that. It's not them wanting to be difficult. It's the nature of their disorder. We'll move right along to Mr. Winston Churchill. He was the English Prime Minister during World War II. He suspected that he may have had bipolar disorder and referred to his depression as a black dog. He was a fantastic leader who led Britain through World War II. And then this is a great opportunity to clarify what bipolar disorder is, as we also have an episode on it if you're interested in. We are just plugging away at our episodes today. I like it.
Shameless.
I guess we've got a big influx of like listeners recently, so we appreciate it. If you guys are liking what you're hearing, feel free to check out all of our past episodes. As long as you don't listen to like the first 10, just skip those. Anyway, Churchill had documented episodes of mania, which is why we think it was more bipolar depression than unipolar depression. So yeah, that's Mr. Winston Churchill.
Yes, and to build a little bit on that bipolar point, yeah, the people with bipolar depression tend to have those manic episodes where at least for 4 to 5 days in a row, they're not sleeping, they have excessive energy, they have what we call grandiosity, they can even have some psychotic features during that time. So people with major depressive disorder, they just have the depression and then they can get back up to their normal selves. People with bipolar, bi meaning two, they have those manic episodes where they get too high and then they get too low and crash and are depressed. So that's a big distinction between major depressive disorder and bipolar depression. But, man, this next one, I didn't want to talk about this one, but it needed to be done. Adolf Hitler. So, academics believe that Hitler may have had borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and possibly even narcissistic personality disorder. Hitler was also doing a ton of amphetamines in his life, which probably wasn't helping his mental health at all.
Yeah.
Some historians think that this may have led, or that he may have also had a psychotic illness such as schizophrenia. But he said that because he had quoted multiple times that he said that he truly believed that he was chosen by fate to lead the German people, which could have been delusional thinking. I mean, any rational, reasonable person would think that maybe that's an unlikely thing. But I got to admit, this is a very messy case. It's really hard to tell with him just what was going on, if he was trying to just convince people to follow him, which he was very persuasive, very convincing, if he actually believed that he was chosen by fate, and how much drugs were messing with his brain. Because we know that stimulants and amphetamines, and I see this all the time in the Midwest because methamphetamine is just rampant out here, is that when you do a lot of amphetamines and methamphetamine, it makes you look like you have bipolar or schizophrenia. And you only really truly know what the diagnosis is once you've been away from the drugs for a while. And you can have both. I've known people who also have schizophrenia and do a lot of meth, and so that makes it messy too. But of note for Hitler, he was incredibly paranoid and was always suspicious of those around him. I believe there's a Tom Cruise movie called Valkyrie in which everyone had accents except for Tom Cruise because he was unable to do an accent, but that's beside the point. But it kind of highlighted how paranoid Hitler was. Even with his most trusted advisors, he never trusted anyone, which could have been a sign of psychosis. It could have been the amphetamines. You don't know. But at the end of his life, he developed a tremor that a lot of scholars agree was likely the result of Parkinson's. So Hitler probably had Parkinson's as well. So overall, in conclusion here, Hitler had a lot going on in terms of his mental health, his neurologic health, and man, tossing the amphetamines on top of there was just fuel to the fire.
I thought you were going to say that the reason why Hitler was so suspicious was because Tom Cruise was the only one that didn't have an accent. And I was like, I feel like that's not historically accurate. I don't know. Why did they feel the need to put Tom Cruise in the World War II era? But
Tom Cruise is a vampire, and he lived back during the 1950s, and he was one of Hitler's most trusted advisors. That's just fact.
I don't doubt that. Before we do the take-home points, I said if I remembered, I was going to mention it. We talk about how being a politician has probably caused a ton of stress for a lot of these people's lives. I remember seeing one time a picture of Obama when he first got elected. He looked nice and young, refreshed, ready to take on the world. And then like 4 years later, of course, it's 4 years, like it happens. But like 4 years, that man was stressed. And he had gray hair and his wrinkles were deeper in his forehead. Like he looked stressed. So it is. I can't imagine the life it is to be a politician. I can't imagine even if it's people that I don't agree with, like just the stress that comes with it, a feeling like you need to be correct all the time. I can't imagine it. So I hope you guys were able to pick that up in today's episode. There's a lot going on when it comes to politicians and their mental health. They're people too. They deserve to have a little bit of a highlight too.
Yeah, another take-home point is that politics does have significant impact on the mental health of the general population. So if you feel like you're the type of person who gets upset about this stuff, you're not alone.
Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to ever take a break from political news. That shit is stressful, especially yesterday because it was election day. But take a break when you can.
And the focus on national news and de-emphasis on local news is eliminating the checks and balances system that is keeping local politicians in check. So it's anticipated that this corruption is going to get even worse the more we defund local news.
Mm-hmm. And one final point, this does not exonerate him or make it seem like it was okay, but the boy Hitler had a lot going on. He was probably a lot sicker than people knew, which probably explains a whole lot of stuff. So just important stuff to know, interesting stuff to know. Fuck that guy, but very interesting to know at this point.
Yeah.
Before we sign off, before we say all our thank yous, I do want to acknowledge our episode is going to be released somewhere in between the date of our 3rd anniversary. We are almost 3 years old as of November something, like the 14th or the 19th. So I'm going to take a couple seconds to just say thank you to everyone who's been listening from the beginning. Thank you to everyone who's just started listening recently. And thank you to everyone in between. Thank you to my good friend and co-host Justin for just being here with me and cranking this out. This has been dope as fuck. 2 weeks ago when we did our last episode to mention to you all again that we're back in the top 25 charts of mental health podcasts in the United States is fucking insane. I don't know if I could have ever imagined that. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you. Justin, feel free to say anything else if you want, because if not, I'm just going to keep talking.
If you give me that opportunity, I'm just going to keep talking about Hitler, so just keep going.
We'll end it on that note. Thank you all for listening. You know where to find us. All your podcasting apps on Apple Podcasts. If you feel inclined to do so, you can leave us a 5-star review or even leave us a comment. We'd love to read it. On Spotify, you can leave us a 5-star review. On the other Apple or the other podcasting apps, I have no idea what they have on there, but just feel free to like and subscribe on those. On Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, you can follow us at Millennial MHC. We love to see your comments. We love to see you just interacting with us, messaging us, whatever it is. We appreciate it all. Thank you all so much. Happy 3 years, Justin. And as always, take care of y'all mentals.